How much are the royals shielded from online gossip? Is there a scenario where Harry and Meghan could be welcomed back into the royal fold with open arms? And what has surprised Rebecca and Richard the most about reporting on the royal family? We'll answer all these questions and more in a very special episode. Hello and welcome to an episode of Palace Confidential with a bit of a difference, and the difference being that the Daily Mail's royal editor Rebecca English and the paper's diary editor Richard Eden will be answering questions from not me, but you, the viewers. And boy, do you have a lot of questions. Buckle up, you two. But before we begin, a reminder to subscribe to the Daily Mail Royal YouTube channel if you haven't already. Sometimes you think you've subscribed to us when actually you haven't, so please do double check for us. Check the subscribe button below and click it to join us. It's free and it means you will never miss any of our brilliant royal content. Okay, so let's kick things off with a question from Christine Bailey, who asks, I would like to know, how much is shielded from the royals? Do they hear all the gossip and naysayers' diatribes? If so, how do they handle the emotions connected to the gossip? Thank you for taking my question. I admire anyone who gives up their lives to champion a cause. These people, be it by birth or marriage, take on a tremendous job of maintaining the confidence of their subjects. It is a good question, Rebecca. The royals are no strangers to criticism, though, are they?
No, actually, it's a clever question. I'm not sure I can tell you about how they feel emotionally, but I would say that some members of the royal family are definitely more aware of what's being said on the street, in the papers, on social media about them than others. So, for example, the late Queen, she would read the papers, you know, to a certain extent. There was a few she would pick up by choice most days, but she was very attuned to the household gossip. Right. She had her ear to the ground on that through obviously a network of people like the ladies in waiting. King Charles, even when he was Prince of Wales, doesn't read a lot about himself. In fact, I've been told that he's given clippings from the newspapers each day about the articles they either think he needs to know about or would like to read. But it's quite carefully curated, to use a Meghan word. It's quite carefully curated what he sees. And he's not particularly interested in the media world or gossip. You know, he's just not really his thing. He just gets on and does his thing, and people either like it or they don't. I mean, obviously younger royals are much more aware of what's going on social media, although they try to shield themselves from it, just really, I think, for the sake of their mental health. Because if you, as we know,
you'd go mad. Slightly
forward-facing jobs, if you read everything, you know, you'd be on a wet heap on the floor at the end of every day. So.
Interestingly, though, look at you smirking there, you imp of a diarist, because I know that you have on occasion, whether inadvertently or not, upset a couple of royals with things you've written, haven't you?
Yes, but they're not usually too upset, I don't think. It's we've spoken before about the Duke of Edinburgh.
I love that story,
took offence at something I'd written. It was a true story, but it's usually the true stories that do end up offending people. And it was about him no longer riding a horse at Trooping the Colour. And he wrote to our proprietor, this is in my previous newspaper, I should say, and that was to complain that I'd got it wrong. It was nothing to do with Prince Philip being too old. It was that the horse was too old. And so he said he didn't want to get a new horse. He felt he was too old for that. So it was an unfair impression that I'd left.
Well, I'm glad we got the record straight on that one, but he obviously hadn't followed the Queen Mother's famous mantra, never complain, never explain.
No, I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? How much attention you do pay to the press and to the media in general. I think, as you say, you can't, now the media is so great, and with social media, it'd be impossible to follow. I mean, we know Prince Harry's spoken about how, he tries to sort of read everything, but, that way madness lies, I think, and in a way having an advisor give you a sort of collection of cuttings they think might be relevant or interesting for you to read is probably a good idea.
And it's interesting, isn't it? You mentioned Prince Harry. My impression has always been that Prince Harry has always had a more combative relationship with the media, and seems angrier that the media even exists to report on them, whereas lots of other members of the royal family have just sort of rightly or wrongly made their peace with the fact that this is because part of the deal we will be talked about.
Well, I think I've got two good examples of that. Funny you should mention it, because Prince Harry did say to me once that he reads, and I think I've said it on the programme, he would read everything that was written about himself, even the supermarket magazines, the comments under the stories online, and I actually used that exact phrase that Richard did. Don't do that. That way madness lies. You can't read all of this stuff, and he does. And he actually joked about, I've got a notebook and I will make a note of who's written what story and I will take it up with them. And I could actually sympathise with that sense of frustration if you felt things that were being written about you that were either wrong or portrayed you in a very unfair way. But I think that's unfortunately something that slightly comes with the territory of being public figures. Whereas there's a very interesting anecdote involving Queen Camilla, then Duchess of Cornwall. Not one of my anecdotes, but actually Gary Goldsmith, the infamous black sheep uncle of the Princess of Wales.
Uncle, yeah.
And an interview, and I just thought it was very illuminating. He was talking about being at a palace function, I think probably in the run-up to the wedding, and feeling like slightly a fish out of water. And Camilla, then Duchess of Cornwall, came up to talk to him, and he kind of said words to the effect of, well, I'm not sure you want to be talking to me because I'm the black sheep of the family. And she kind of smiled and laughed and went, oh, don't worry, so have been I've been over the years, just roll with it, it's fine, we'll be kind of two black sheep together. I thought that showed her quite amusing reaction to someone who has definitely been on the receiving end of a fair share of brickbats over the years, and I think that's probably a better way to approach it.
And we should say Queen Camilla's a great supporter of the press. She knows the importance of it, and of course her son Tom is a journalist at the Mail on Sunday.
In fact, she's gone to various kind of as a guest press club events, and I think I remember saying to her when I was covering one, I said, gosh, you're walking into the lion's den. But she actually quite likes journalists, because I think she likes, dare I say, a diarist, mischievous sense of humour, and she appreciates that the third estate is part of democracy. So
there you have it. Well, on the topic of people who aren't too keen on the royals, Karen asks, what does the monarchy think of the Republican movement? For our international viewers, Republic is a pressure group who want to abolish the British monarchy in favour of a democratic republic. So, Richard, how do you think the royals feel about Republic?
Yeah, I mean, we should say Republic's just one group. There's plenty of other Republicans in Britain, but they are still very much in the minority. So I think obviously the royal family are aware of them, and very much so when there've been some vocal protests, which we've seen at the coronation on other occasions. I mean, they had great hopes that with the change of monarch when King Charles became king. They had great hopes that this would lead to the end of the monarchy. They've been predicting for years that respect and affection for the monarchy would die with Queen Elizabeth. But that hasn't happened, and so there's a lot of disappointment and frustration, I think, from them. So in terms of the royal family, I would say they keep an eye on them and everything, and obviously they're interested in that sort of sentiment and how far it goes. But at the moment in Britain, it's not great compared with other countries like Spain, for example, where there's much stronger Republican feeling.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Rebecca, as Richard alluded to, we recently saw Catherine and her children facing booing and chants of "Not My King" from Republican protesters at Trooping the Colour. Do you think that the royals are briefed on how to react, particularly when they're being observed in that situation?
Yeah, and Richard's right that there's a definite sense of that small movement becoming deliberately more vocal after the death of Queen Elizabeth. I think they think people just would not have tolerated a loud, noisy demonstration. I often see these demonstrations when I'm out on royal engagements, and there's only a handful of people, but they have megaphones and kind of large yellow flags to make themselves more visible. The royals generally just ignore it. The one thing I do think it's worth pointing out, and I would, absolutely die in a ditch for the Republicans' right to demonstrate. It's part of our democracy. I just think sometimes they probably need to pick their moments better. And while I think things like maybe the state opening of Parliament is a fair arena for that, when they were, as they were the other day, demonstrating at Trooping the Colour, which is the kind of King's birthday celebrations, and you're booing and chanting while young children are going past you. I feel very uncomfortable with that personally. I think that makes it feel like a bear pit for the children, almost kind of gladiatorial. And I'm not sure personally that that's appropriate. But
no, we don't want to become like Russia, where protests are banned. That's the thing.
Absolutely not, and they have every right. And there have been issues over the years where the police have got slightly heavy-handed with them, and wrongly so. And rightly, Republic have managed to secure an apology for that. I think just sometimes they need to pick their moments. I'm laughing because I was in Edinburgh this week working, and they staged a demonstration on a hillside above the palace by putting giant letters saying "Not my king" on the hillside, but they were so far away. We were trying to work out what they were saying, and it was a bit like saying, "No, take my ride." Like we couldn't actually work it out, so it wasn't massively effective. Yeah. It wasn't massively effective.
Sounds like an eye test.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, one of the sad things is when they do demonstrate, as absolutely they have a right to do at these public engagements, it just means the member of the royal family is not going to go and shake hands with a well-wisher standing next to them, because obviously they can see what the optics would look like, and they don't want to be obviously booed. But I've actually seen occasions where the crowd have turned against the Republican demonstrators and gone, "We've been here for 4 hours and now the King's not going to come over and say hello." So it's a bit of a work in progress.
Indeed. Well, now on to something a little bit lighter, and Ali Darnell asks, how do the royals get ready for events like a banquet? Do the ladies meet in a room with pre-selected crowns or jewels? Do they bring sketches and choose? I'm looking at you, Rebecca, you must know.
Well, they don't meet in a room beforehand to conflab about outfits, just as I hate to tell viewers, we don't either. But there is conversations between their private offices and their various dressers and valets, I think, to make sure that, is it going to be white tie, is it going to be black tie, is it lounge suits, what's the dress code? They will then put in requests to the senior dresser to ask for particular pieces of jewellery if they want to wear them. So there's a definite level of coordination. And obviously in the case of the Wales family, we see great coordination often in what they wear. But Charlotte will match, obviously.
Which was gorgeous at Trooping the Colour. But is there also a conversation of, well, you can't wear blue because I'm wearing blue? Does it work that way?
It's not that direct. I mean, you might expect one member of the family, if say the more senior woman says, well, I'm planning to wear a green dress, a green evening gown, Catherine the Chancellor, she wouldn't come in something as orange as this, because it would look a little bit clashing alongside each other, but it's no more than that, I don't think. Interesting.
Well, Richard, the question of jewellery and tiaras hasn't been without its controversy over the years, has it?
No, it really hasn't. I mean, essentially the crown jewels are there for different members of the royal family, the royal women to wear. And obviously it needs to be carefully kept and organised. And in Queen Elizabeth's case, it was Angela Kelly, her dresser and right-hand woman, who used to be in charge of the jewellery collection, organising it. And we know it was a real sticking point in the run-up to Harry and Meghan's wedding.
Yes.
Because of the choice of tiaras. And the allegation from Harry and Meghan was that Angela Kelly had made it difficult and deliberately put obstacles in the way of Meghan choosing a tiara that suited her. I'm sure Angela Kelly's too discreet to talk about it, but she'll have a very different view of that.
Yes.
We've heard all about the rows of what Meghan wants, Meghan gets, and that sort of thing. So, it's difficult. So, in theory, everyone's got access to them, but then who's in charge and who decides? There was a lovely programme, actually, where Queen Elizabeth spoke about the jewels. It was really, I don't know if it's still available now, but it was really interesting, and she was pointing out the different crowns and things. Do you remember that?
Is that the one where, I think it was the time with one of her jubilees, and I think it was with Alistair Bruce, the commentator, and she had the imperial state crown and everyone's kind of standing around it, and she just kind of picked it up like it was a baseball cap and went, "No, this is one's crown," and putting it down there. I was watching it like biting my nails, like, I mean, that's a priceless crown jewel there. But
Isn't
she's
it
so
crazy?
used to it.
It was pretty much the closest we've ever had to an interview with Queen Elizabeth, actually.
Amazing. I'll have to seek that out. Is it like a library with the crown jewels? Like, you can have that for 3 days, but it's like...
Well, not with the crown jewels, because obviously the crown jewels are only, by the monarch and their spouse. But obviously there are these amazing vaults with all the tiaras in, the necklaces. I mean, what I would not give to have a little route around there. It'd be amazing.
Let's work on that. Maybe they'll let us.
I'll have a word.
Yeah, please do. Well, we actually have a follow-up question to do with banquets from Anna Wildy, who asks, what sort of food do the royals eat at state banquets so that they don't spill anything onto their beautiful gowns? Now, Rebecca, you've been on the sidelines for many state banquets. What have you observed? Is that actually a consideration? Do they plan the menu around elaborate outfits?
No, not that I'm aware of, but I mean, the food, talking about state banquet food, it's always, they try to make it seasonal. They will always try to reflect something that comes from the royal estates, whether it's, you know, fish or beef or lamb or you know, or venison or something like that. I mean, it's one of the real privileges of my job to cover these state banquets, and I get to look at the table beforehand it's set up, which is it's a work of art.
I bet.
And you know, each knife and fork are measured the exact distance from being away from themselves. I mean, I don't think I could even accept an invitation if I ever got one, because I genuinely wouldn't know what knives and forks to use. They have the fruit bowls, they have all of the incredible gilded plateware out. I mean, it is spectacular. The one thing that always used to throw us in Queen Elizabeth's times is she would always have her menus written out in French. And we never got an English translation. So we'd all be sitting there in this little room, we'd be given the menu in French, and we'd all be kind of, you know, looking through kind of Google Translate and stuff, or our rudimentary French from school, trying to work out exactly what it was they were eating, because, you know, we're always fearful of it being something like venison and translating it as hamburger or something like that.
But I do suspect they take into account sort of avoiding messiness. Now, you can't imagine them serving a, you know, bowl of spaghetti or something.
Well, they don't serve soup. For
No,
one thing,
no,
it's always something that, you know, that's easy to transfer from fork to mouth and otherwise. But I'm sure there's probably been a few accidents over the years.
I'd like to hear about those one day. Well, this leads us nicely to a question from Maggie Davies, who asks, does Rebecca curtsy to the King and Queen when she meets them? I mean, you meet them a lot.
Oh, I don't actually.
Did you curtsy to? You were recently there with the King and Queen. Did you in Edinburgh? Did you curtsy to them then?
I don't. I mean, so with Queen Elizabeth,
It's just treason, it is.
I mean, I'm there in a professional capacity, and I think we've discussed this before. The staff who work for them, the first time they walk in the room, they will always curtsy or bow. They don't have to continue as they walk in and out of rooms.
Yeah.
But and I actually asked a senior member of staff, why do you do this? And they said, well, it's a kind of matter of respect for us. We don't expect other people to do it, but it's a matter of respect for us. And I'm just always there in a very different professional capacity. I've got a great big handbag on, I've got my phone, I've got my notepad, I've got my pen, and they definitely don't expect us to. So no, I don't. But I did when I met Queen Elizabeth a couple of times more formally in lineups at various kind of media events. I did curtsy then, and I kind of, it was instinctive really, that you were in a lineup and you shook hands, and I did do a little bob. I think I just about remembered my ballet training from when I was 6 or 7, so hopefully I didn't embarrass myself.
I did a bit of practicing before I met the Queen in a lineup.
Oh, when did you
Didn't
meet
want to
the
get
Queen?
that wrong. It was in. I've been a couple of times actually. I've been to Buckingham Palace, but it was 2006, I think, just before they did an Australian tour.
Yes, I remember that.
And they invited lots of Australians in the media to go and meet there. And it happened to be also my birthday. So I met the Queen on my birthday.
Nice.
Well, that's very special. I remember that one. Jason Donovan was there.
Oh, everyone was there, darling.
Hugh Jackman was there. Yeah.
Everyone. Yeah. Now, Richard, what do you do? Do you bow? Do you curtsy when you meet the royals?
I think it's a bit easier for us men actually, because instead of a sort of, you know, elaborate curtsy or even a little curtsy, we can bow. So I think, you know, I would generally just sort of, you know, give a bow, a sort of nod of the head. And that's, you know, a mark of respect without sort of feeling kind of excessive.
So which ones have you bowed to?
That's what I would do. I'm not listing them all, am
Go
I?
on, come on, we want to know.
I've certainly bowed to Queen Elizabeth.
There you go.
I think to the King, or Prince Charles as he then was.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, as you go down sort of junior ranks, I'm not sure I would when meeting a sort of minor member of the royal family or something. But
I will, however, say in my defence, I do call them Sarah Mum. I won't ever say Charles or Camilla or anything like that. I will always say Sir Mark, and now obviously would say good morning. You know, King walked past me the other day smiling. I said, "Oh, good afternoon, Your Majesty." You know, I will always use their correct titles, and he seems quite happy with that.
I have to say, I've seen people bow to celebrities. I remember Elizabeth Hurley entering a party with her then husband, and people would sort of bow as she came in. So, you know, it's not just the royal family.
She is the queen to some people. What can you say?
Does she not play a queen?
She did play the
Yeah.
queen.
She's
in
a
the
queen
royals.
to her fans. Well, look, let's go back in time now to talk about the much-loved Queen Elizabeth II, as Katie B asks, I would love to know more about Queen Elizabeth's at-home education when she was growing up. What subjects did she study? How much did it differ from the standard education in those days? It's a great question, that, because I think the way it was portrayed on The Crown sort of like opened up that line of questioning for me. Richard, what do you know?
You know what, I think we really should do a special programme about education of monarchs through the ages, because it's such an interesting subject. But in the case of the Queen, she never had a formal education. I think it was something that sort of rankled with her later in life, and I think particularly with Prince Philip, who was so interested in so many different aspects that she actually felt quite uneducated often, and it spurred her to try to learn as much as possible. So what she had was basically training to be a monarch. So she had lessons from her father, who was king, and then they enlisted the vice provost, that's a senior figure at Eton College. So you know, girls might not go to Eton, but they came to her, and he gave her lessons in the Constitution and basic aspects of the law, so she learnt from them. And then they had a succession of what were known as governesses, where it was ladies often who were French themselves who taught her French,
right?
Which is why the Queen had very good French, actually.
Fluent,
partly might explain why all the menus, the dinners were always in French. But so she learnt in that informal way, and I should explain that was very normal at the time for women from aristocratic backgrounds. I mean, this idea of, you know, members of the royal family going to school is something very new, really. You know, traditionally they'd be taught by tutors at home.
Well, it's interesting because it does seem a lot of people are interested in royal education, because Christine Alexandra is asking, we know Prince George is being prepared to be the king one day, but if, God forbid, he were unable to be king, are Charlotte and Louis being trained? Rebecca, is it training, or is it more, there's a more general prep, whether we're talking about George or the other children?
Yeah, I mean, I think training is too formal a word. You've got to bear in mind the ages of the children. They're still primary school age. So I think the way William and Catherine have approached it is a very gentle immersion and a kind of introduction to the fact that they are normal children, but the lives that they will lead are in some ways not so slightly normal, and a kind of gentle understanding of what that entails. For George, it is going to become more formal, obviously, because, you know, he is now reaching an age where he will start going to secondary school and is much more aware of his role as a future king. But they have taken it very gently and very slowly with their children, and very much deliberately so, because they want them to enjoy a childhood unfettered by some of the weight of expectation that will be on them in later
real
years.
life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you think Queen Elizabeth, you know, never thought she was going to become queen. They always thought they'd be the second family. Life changed, and so she became very immersed in that at a very, very early age.
Yes.
And they've definitely looked to do things differently with their children.
You can tell they're getting instruction on the job. You know, at any event like Trooping the Colour, I think you can certainly see Princess Charlotte, you know, who's sort of giving directions to her younger brother Louis, often about, you know, you've got to wave now or do this.
Yeah, it's so sweet.
So they kind of know what's expected of them, I think.
Do you have any thoughts, either of you, on what's the mental gymnastics around trying to make sure there isn't another spare problem in what we've had with Prince Harry?
Ooh, Joe, that's a good question. Well, I think the fact that you see the Wales children so close and so happy, I think we can all hope that will never happen, and they will have learned from bitter experience.
That was the case with William and Harry.
I know, but the trouble is, I think then their childhoods were in certain ways affected by their parents' divorce at a fairly young age, and obviously the loss of their mother, which I think obviously affected their characteristics growing up. So let's just hope that never happens in the Wales's case.
Indeed.
I should say it's a similar problem or problem, so to speak, for all sort of big aristocratic families in Britain, because it's still the son who inherits the estate. So, they know that eldest son will have a different life from the rest of the family. So it's not unique in Britain, it's not unique to the royal family. The idea of the heir and the spare kind of goes with the territory, and it's something that they grow up with.
I have to say, when you see King Charles and Princess Anne together, they couldn't have a sweeter, closer relationship, and
True.
there is definitely no resentment there in any way, shape or form between them. And I think one of the sweetest moments in the coronation was some of the footage that was aired as part of the kind of subsequent documentary I think our very own Robert Hardman was involved in. And you see the king in all his finery greeting Anne at Buckingham Palace, and you hear her go, hello old bean.
Aww.
And it was just, I think, really lovely, and you can just see how close they are and how supportive she's been of him. So not everyone has to be resentful of being a spare.
Very
put it
true.
that way.
Well, now that we have mentioned Harry and Meghan, here is a question from Marianne Dobrolowski, hope I said that right, who asks, if Harry and Meghan want to return to royal duties, how would that work? Would they get to start right away, or would there be a transition period? Others have taken on their duties, so would they get them back? Where would they live? Would all of Harry's military titles be given back? Curious in Canada, you certainly are. There's a lot to unpack there. Rebecca, any thoughts?
Many.
Okay.
The first thing is, I don't think that will ever happen. I think there is too much water under the bridge. I mean, do remind me of this when it does happen in about 10 years' time. But my gut feeling is no, it will never happen. But not just because of what we've seen in the last couple of years with Harry's spectacular falling out with most of his family. I just don't think Harry wants to come back into the institution of the monarchy because he finds it very stifling. He's got this lovely carefree life in California. Why would he even want to come back to that on a part-time basis? I also actually think, I have to say, I think the media is an issue for him, because we are part and parcel of being a member of the royal family. We are allowed to fairly and freely report on that, and he has made very clear that he doesn't consider that something he ever wants to have to do again. So I think simply by the fact that he would have to have people like me covering his events, he wouldn't want that at all. So I just don't think it's going to happen. If it were to ever happen, they would get their HRH titles back, I'm sure, because they've only not allowed to use them because they're no longer working members of the royal family and are pursuing commercial careers. But I just think for me, it's just not a goer from the start.
It is clearly a hypothetical situation, Richard, but do you think they would be welcomed back with open arms?
No. I mean, it depends by whom, doesn't it? I just think for what they've done, and I mean, think about it, it would have to be Prince William would have to be on board with welcoming them back, and I think that trust has gone, and trust is so important, isn't it? That basic sense of discussing things, any conversation they had. I mean, they never thought that conversations they had in private at home would be reported. It was unprecedented for the royal family. So I think that trust has gone. I mean, so even theoretically, they'd have to agree to certain things, and it would make it such a... Remember, with the royal family, it's tricky because it's a family and it's an institution.
Yeah.
So it's unique in public life like that. And that inevitably relies on trust, doesn't it? And so once that's gone, I find it very hard. So, no, I have to be honest, I don't think they would be welcome back, no.
And actually, sorry, Joe, I was going to say, in terms of answering the original question, in terms of where would they live, I was at a fairly recent Royal Finance briefing and I asked a question about Frogmore Cottage. And I said, here's a hardy annual for you, keeper of the Privy Purse, is Frogmore Cottage still empty, and are there any plans, if so, to fill it? And the answer was very direct, it is still empty, and no, there are no immediate plans to fill it. Now, we all know that's because the King has suggested that as a home for Prince Andrew.
Yes.
And he has very clearly said he doesn't want to downgrade to somewhere as small as a 5-bedroom cottage with a beautiful garden. But it is still empty, so if they ever moved back, it was still a property they could use.
They don't like it either, though.
Well, I think they were fond of it, but they all felt that they were worthy of something grander. And actually, the house that I always believed was earmarked for Harry and his future wife, whoever that may have been, and children, was Clarence House in London.
Ah, yes.
Which is now, because of the building works at Buckingham Palace, has been retained as a royal residence by King Charles and Queen Camilla. And I think will still be used with them now, because the Waleses have made very clear they don't really want it. They're going to keep on Kensington Palace as a London base, but for the foreseeable future they want to stay at Windsor.
Must be so nice. I don't want that one, I want that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, they do have life choices available to them that most of us don't have, to be fair.
Well, Meghan is one of the most recent people to marry into the royal family, and with that in mind, DMRC asks, what type of training or preparation is given to newcomers to the royal family? Meghan swears she had no help, but Princess Catherine seems so poised in every situation, like she was born for the role. Was it training or just personality? Good one. Rebecca, if I married into the royal family tomorrow, God knows who they'd drag to the altar to have me. But
Prince Andrew?
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's move on. What kind of support would I receive?
You would receive actually far more support than I think people have been led to believe in recent years. I mean, look, to be fair with the Meghan and Catherine situation, you know, Catherine is British. She went to a very good public boarding school. She had a long process in terms of being Prince William's girlfriend for a long period of time before they announced their engagement. So she had a lot longer to get her head around what it meant to be a member of the royal family and what it involved. I also think because she was used to mixing in those circles, she had a bit more of an understanding about what it meant. And also she was a very willing student. She was very keen to learn what would make her a good working member of the royal family. Meghan was very different. She had the opposite of that. She had a very short introduction to it. And not a lot of time to get her head around it. The difference being there, and I've been told this from people I trust implicitly, is that she was offered a lot of help. She was offered effectively lessons in everything from, you know, diplomacy to etiquette to, you know, what royal charities to choose, and she turned all of this down, and she basically said, I'm fine, you know, I'm a working woman, I'm a woman of the world, there's nothing you can really teach me, and if there's anything I need to know, I will just ask my husband and he will tell me. So my understanding was that she was offered all of this help, and she very deliberately turned it down. So I think the idea that you are thrown into this situation without any help or support is just not true. I also know in her case that she was offered the help of some of the Queen's very senior lady-in-waiting, which was considered a really thoughtful gesture by Queen Elizabeth, but again was rather rejected as, why would I need these kind of elderly ladies to tell me what to do? You know, I'm almost a rock star in my own right. So, I think the idea that you would not be given any help is not quite correct.
I'll bear that in mind. But Richard, do you think it's safe to say then that Catherine and Meghan simply had different approaches and different understandings about joining the royal family? So how do you think the likes of someone like Sophie of Edinburgh fared, and how she approached it?
Well, I mean, let's be clear. I mean, the Queen made extra efforts with Meghan, and she really, you know, she broke royal conventions. I mean, you mentioned Sophie. So, for example, Sophie had to wait until she was married to Prince Edward before being invited to stay at Sandringham. Well, in Meghan's case, the Queen broke all decades of, you could say centuries of royal convention, and invited her to spend Christmas with the royal family before the couple were married. So, you know, it was things like that. She really went out of her way to make sure she felt welcome and that she was prepared to do things differently to accommodate Meghan. But I think Sophie was always keen to learn and keen to accept things the way they were in the royal family, and whereas Meghan came in with a different approach. I mean, you know, we saw that from that memorable press conference of the Royal Foundation where we had the Fab Four, as the press described them.
It was a long time ago.
William, Catherine, Harry and Meghan, and it was very much Meghan's centre stage. You know, she wanted to be giving her opinions, and you could tell that Catherine felt a bit awkward, frankly, at that stage. So I think a lot of it's about approach to the job, approach to the role.
Well, let's move on. We have a question from Rachel, who has asked, do you think we'll see King Charles III or the Prince and Princess of Wales visit Canada next year? Rebecca, you went with the King to Canada very recently. When do you think they might go back?
Well, I think there's a chance it could be next year, but I think it will definitely be within the next 2 years. Obviously, the King's visit to Canada historically for the state opening of their parliament was something that was pushed through pretty quickly, and it came in place of a trip he had hoped to make there, as Canada is considered the senior realm, the year before, a proper tour of Canada, and obviously he had to cancel that because of his cancer diagnosis. And I was told by a very senior royal aide that they still have the working plans for that trip on ice, and I think there is a hope that they will be able to roll that out sooner rather than later. The trouble is, as we're recording this, we've got American state visit coming up in the autumn. Next year, towards the end of the year, we've got Chogam in Antigua. So the diary is already filling up with some big set pieces. So whether it will be next year, I'm not so sure, but I know the hope is to go back and do a proper visit, not just focusing on the capital, but meeting Canadians all around the country as soon as possible.
And my hope is that Palace Confidential will be there to cover it.
Oh, wouldn't that be great?
That's the dream, that we go on tour,
Palace
right?
Confidential on the road.
Yeah, come on, tour bus and everything. Yeah. Well, after the recent news that the Wales family have bred puppies from their dog Orla, Lady Ventress has a very important question. Have any royals ever had a cat? You only hear about dogs. Sincerely, a cat lady. I think I'm more a dog lady. What can you tell us, Rebecca?
They're not particularly cat people, I have to say, generally. You're right, and our viewer is right, that they are dog people. Although I have to say, historically, we've always had a patron of Battersea Dogs and Cats Home in London. It's currently Queen Camilla, it was Queen Elizabeth for many years, so they do support cats in that way. The one member of the royal family I know that does own cats, and particularly love cats, are Prince and Princess Michael of Kent, and they have Burmese cats. And I always remember that because I've always had dogs and cats together, and I've always historically had Burmese cats, which are very affectionate and very yowly.
And very pretty.
They are beautiful, and they rule the roost over the dogs like nobody's business. So the answer is they're not cat people. I think probably for the King, he probably doesn't like the fact they kill wildlife as well, so he's probably a bit unhappy about that. But Prince and Princess Michael of Kent are definitely cat people.
There you go, there's your answer. Okay, so we also have a question about Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie from Lynn Wellesby, who asks, what are they like? Do they really deserve the sometimes bad press they get? Now, Richard, we know you're a big fan, so what can you tell us about the York
Well, I
sisters?
think the fact they've got so many friends tells you a lot. That they're very popular. I've met them quite a few times over the years at parties. I mean, obviously, you know, when they meet journalists, they'll be on their best behaviour. They're always very polite, never say anything too controversial, but very well behaved and very popular. So I think that, you know, they're good, sensible women.
Now, Rebecca, Lynn does refer there to bad press, but is that fair? Do they get bad press, given they never do seem to put a foot wrong?
I don't think they currently get bad press. Certainly as older women, as mothers, as wives, they haven't. I think they've done a very good job. I do think you need to also cast your mind back, though, to when they were teenagers, and they did get quite a lot of bad press then, and quite a lot of bad publicity, because, of course, at that time, they had 24-hour taxpayer-funded security, as did their father. And we saw them over a period of years on a succession of really luxury holidays, partying with the south of France with their mates. I mean, I remember having to do a calculation of how many trips Princess Beatrice had done in a year and how much it was costing taxpayers. And there was a lot of a lot of negative publicity around that, and I think probably rightly so, is because they end up having the security, the round-the-clock taxpayer-funded security taken away from them. But I also felt really sorry for them at that time, because I think for any young woman in the public eye, when you're finding yourself, you're finding, growing into your looks, your fashion, they got some really horrible coverage at the time. And I remember really distinctly having a conversation with Princess Beatrice. I haven't had many conversations with them over the years, but I always remember this one. And she was getting really relentlessly trolled about her weight, her size, and the way she looked. And as, a woman that's always struggled in that area, I really felt for her. And I remember being at a function with her and her mum, and she was talking to me about it and saying how hurtful she found it. And I said, oh, look, let's have a chat about this. I wasn't going to write a story, I was just sympathising with her.
And how old would she be?
She's going to be about 16, 17,
right,
I reckon.
Yeah.
And I remember there being a table, and there weren't any chairs, and I said, oh, look, should we sit on this table? And I kind of lifted myself onto the table like this, but didn't realise there was a cup underneath me. And I crushed this plastic cup underneath my bum. And I just turned to her to say, I think I said something to her along the lines of, well, talking about the bum the size of China, and it kind of broke the ice and we started laughing. But she did say on a serious, she was saying to me, why do people say these things? I'm just like a young girl, and I really, really felt for her, So, they've had mixed coverage over the years, but I think the coverage recently has been a lot better, and I really hope it stays that way.
Indeed. Well, we're going to wrap this episode up with one of my favourite questions from One Crafty Dollo, who commented, greetings from the States. What, in your experience, would be the most surprising thing for each of you in terms of covering the royals over the years? For example, how they interact with one another, or how they're really like other families, albeit with palaces and crowns. Now, Rebecca, you must have some good stories here. You've been covering the royal beat since 2004.
Child bride I was, Jo.
Would you like to go first? Indeed, yeah. You were about 12 or something, I think. Yeah.
What, in terms of their kind of interaction, interactions
just
with each
what
other?
surprised you the most?
The funny thing is, they're the most extraordinary family you could meet, and yet in other ways they're the most ordinary, because they have the same interactions with family members as we do, in terms of, they love each other one minute, they hate each other the next. So seeing that close up has been really eye-opening, and also, quite a privilege. And some family members are really approachable, and I never underestimate seeing them so close up. What an extraordinary and very strange and weird life it is that they lead. And I always remember early on into her role as Duchess of Cornwall. It was a few years, maybe, I think, after she married the Prince of Wales, and I was covering a trip to Canada with Charles and Camilla, and I had to leave early because I needed to go and take the tiles off my bathroom wall. And someone had obviously told her that, and I was at a function, and I literally, covering the function, I had my suitcase there ready to go straight to the airport, and she came up to me, and I hadn't really spoken to her very much at that point, and she kind of came up and said, is it true that you're leaving our tour early to go home and do your bathroom? And I said, yeah, no, it is. And she said, why doesn't your husband do it? And I just looked at her, and without thinking, I just said, well, would you trust your husband with the bathroom?
Excellent.
And then I started laughing. I couldn't help it. I was like, no, your husband really wouldn't be doing the bathroom, would he? And she kind of laughed. But then she said something really significant. She said, oh, it's a real shame, because I don't think anyone realises how terrifying it is doing this, especially when you're new to it and you get out of the car and there's flash bulbs going and this sea of faces. And she said, it's just sometimes nice to see a face in that crowd that you recognise, that you can focus on and think, okay, I know I can look at that person and not get so nervous. So
you're her face.
It wasn't just me she was
Safe
talking
face.
about. There was, a couple of photographers and a couple of other journalists we mentioned. But, it just made me realise that, what a strange life it is. And they have quite ordinary family relations within a very, very strange setup.
It's crazy, isn't it? What about you, Richard? Anything particularly surprising?
I think the thing that surprised me is I sort of had this image of the royal family being, having this great protection. You kind of imagine, sort of the army protects them and everything. So we're used to seeing the guards. And this is something that's been emphasised by Prince Harry's court cases over his removal of his taxpayer-funded protection. But actually, what's remarkable is that they often don't. They can go about their lives very normally. you know, I was at a restaurant just a few weeks ago, and who did we see turn up? But it was Prince Edward and Sophie.
Really?
And I think they had a car drop them off, looked like a taxi, frankly, and there was no protection or anything. There was no fuss, and everyone, you know, being Britain, we kind of just carry on as normal.
Well, everyone wants to be cool, don't they?
Yeah, so no one was approaching them, and they were just like any other couple enjoying a Saturday evening at a restaurant.
Yeah. Which restaurant?
That sort of thing. It was quite a swanky one, I have to say. But yeah, it's that really. It's about how they can go about their lives pretty normally.
Actually, Rick, you do touch on a really good point there, Richard, because they don't often have security. Certainly, obviously not the King or the Queen, and they do. And I do, you know, William as well and Catherine. I do feel sorry for them in that respect, you know, because they're always living their life with someone walking past, you know, behind them with a gun, kind of 3 steps behind. But Princess Anne only has security when she goes on royal engagements. You mentioned Sophie and Edward. They often drive themselves on their own to jobs, and, you know, they might have one, if they're working, a discreet security detail, but it's remarkably low key. And when I did a big piece about Prince Edward for his 60th birthday, one of his close friends said to me, you know, he does sometimes travel on the tube to jobs. And I think if you go and try not to draw your attention to yourself, most of the time people don't tend to notice you. So like you say, it is very possible to do that.
Fascinating. Well, there you have it. Some surprises there. Well, that is all we've got time for today. We didn't even get through all the questions that I had for you both, but we will do another one of these very soon. So if you've got any more royal related questions, do comment down below and make sure to mention where you're from. We absolutely love hearing from Palace Confidential viewers all over the world. And who knows, it might be your question we feature next in another special Q&A episode like this one. Thank you to Rebecca and Richard for all your knowledge and insights. Best in the business. And thanks to you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.